Hello. When we talk about the function of the skeleton, we are talking about the function of the bones because the bones make up the majority of our adult skeleton. So, obviously, we have, because of our skeleton, the ability to move. So, muscles attach, attach to bones and allow for movement. Okay, that's one function. You might remember that they attach via a connective tissue in most cases, and that would be the tendons that attach the muscles to the bone. We can also talk about how it provides support. So the skeleton provides support. So not just movement, but the ability to stand upright, for example, is due to the spinal column, the vertebral column, but also our legs, right, that allow us to stay in a bipedal position. So it provides support. The other thing that it does is it provides protection. So if you think about the rib cage, for example, providing protection for the heart and the lungs, and then your pelvis providing protection for your lower abdominal organs, like your urinary bladder, and in females, that would be the ovaries as well down there. And when we talk about that, you could place your fingers and see if you can feel that bottom rib and then the top of your pelvis. And there's not generally much space between those. So that is very protective. We do have a little bit of space in the front and a little bit to the sides where we have our abdominal muscles that also provide protection for our internal organs, but we have protection for those via the rib cage and the pelvis. We also have the cranium or the skull providing protection for our brain. And then we have the vertebral column, which have foramen, vertebral foramen in the middle of them, holes where our spinal cord travels down. And that would be a protective function. We can also talk about the matrix of the bone containing calcium and phosphates. And so this is actually where we can store those minerals. So we can talk about the storage of minerals. So calcium and phosphate. Calcium is a really actually important ion in our blood, and it is super important to the function of the nervous system, but also the function of your muscular system. So if you don't take in enough calcium, you could actually get calcium from your bones. So you could have osteoclasts or bone cells that break down your matrix and release calcium into the blood. If you take in extra calcium, then calcium can be stored in your skeleton. But remember that our skeleton wants to be strong, but it also needs to be relatively light. And so we'll talk about that structure of the bone that allows for both of those. So we have hormones that help to regulate that calcium level in the blood, and they either cause calcium to be taken out of the bone or calcium to be deposited into the bone. The fifth one is kind of interesting. We actually discovered in the 1970s that there is hormones that are produced by the bone. And this production of osteocalcin. So this is an example of a hormone. We generally do not think of our skeletal system as an endocrine system producing hormones, but it does. The bones do produce hormones. And we're actually finding out that there are more places in your body where hormones are produced rather than just the major endocrine glands that we think of. And so when we talk about osteocalcin is very interesting. One of the things that it's believed to be in charge of is the regulation of blood glucose levels. So we talked about, when we talk about homeostasis, and homeostatic imbalances. This is a really important one because when we don't regulate our blood glucose levels, we get diabetes. So this is the regulation of blood glucose levels. It also is thought to be responsible for help in fat burning. And they've recently discovered that when you are kind of shocked into fight or flight, you actually see a great increase in osteocalcin. So it actually also might allow us to get away from predators, for example. So there's some things that we still don't know about this specific hormone. So those are the major functions of the skeletal of the bones. One that I forgot to put down here was the production of blood cells. Blood cells. And this is in the bone marrow, specifically in the red bone marrow. So we have stem cells that are located in this red bone marrow, and they can undergo cell division, and they can produce red blood cells, but they can also produce white blood cells and platelets. And so you'll remember that blood is a type of connective tissue. It actually has cells within a matrix, which is the blood plasma, but it is also produced by stem cells that are found in your bone marrow. And so, and sometimes when you have bone marrow, or if you have blood cancers, like or lymphoma, or leukemia, that's the word I was thinking. Sometimes they do bone marrow transplants, right? So you take some of the bone marrow out of one person, a healthy person, and put them into the other, so that you have healthy stem cells that can give rise to the cells. So leukemia, that's what the word I was thinking of. In the bone marrow of adults, oftentimes we don't have red bone marrow, but we have yellow bone marrow. And so this functions in the storage of fat. So this is in the yellow bone marrow. And I think I mentioned that the fat adipose tissue tends to be yellow because of the carotenoids. And so that is why it's called the yellow bone marrow. So if, like, for example, if you took our humerus or our femur and you broke it open, there would actually be a deposit of fat inside the center of the cell. When you're newborn, when you're babies and you're producing lots of blood, you probably would have red bone marrow in most of those spaces inside of the bones, the medullary cavities. But as you become an adult, that reduces. One place where we do maintain red bone marrow is in our hip bones. So like if you place your hands on the hips, that's the hip bone, the coxal bone. And so that is one place where they can get that red bone marrow out for bone marrow transplants. Okay, so let me check my notes and make sure that that was everything that I wanted to talk about, and that is it. So many different functions of the skeleton.